Good morning and welcome again to Game Talk. I'm David Stark. I make a game called Airships Conquer the Skies and I sometimes rant about games. Speaking of which, we really need to find a better name for this thing. Game Talk is almost painfully generic. It just sounds like some kind of call-in radio show about something, sports or something. I guess I could just call it David Rants About Computer Games, but it might be a bit long in terms of a title. I will think about this. If you have a suggestion what I should call it instead, do tell me on chat. As usual, I'm on chat on my trusty iPad to monitor what you're saying and respond to it. Now, one moment as I tweet about the fact that this is now up. Excellent. So yes, this particular show thing is the first new kind of one after I went away for a little bit, and marks the start of hopefully a kind of continued set of actually me doing streaming again. I don't have anything in particular going on in the near future, so hopefully I will be able to just do streaming. Okay, so what we're going to do today is I'm going to play some Binding of Isaac, well, the Binding of Isaac, which I don't know, I mean, if you've been living under a rock, it's a kind of dungeon crawler type game where you play a little boy who is like running away from his abusive mother into a kind of hideous fantasy world of monsters. So yeah, let's play that. That will be fun. What? It's Binding of Isaac Rebirth. So Binding of Isaac is really one of the kind of classics, I guess, of modern indie games. It's made by Edmund Macmillan, who also made Super Meat Boy, I think. Yeah, this is like the second version. Which is pretty similar to the first version, really, but this one's more pixelated. I don't quite get that, why this one has what I honestly consider to be worse graphics, but you know, whatever. Okay, so yeah, you play this little boy called Isaac, and he's running away from his mom into a kind of hideous underground world of monsters. I'm just going to play it a bit. I'm not super duper good at it, but I'm okay, so hopefully this won't be completely painful for you guys to watch. Right. So, just start out with Isaac as our character, nothing special in particular. Okay, here we go. So this is the game. This here is Isaac, and you just, you lay bombs if you press the wrong buttons, but anyway, you just move around with WASD and you attack with the arrow keys. And so this is like the first thing which I mean with, this is sort of a positional game where your relative position to your enemies really matters, because the point is you can move diagonally, and you can move in straight lines. It's sort of hard to do kind of very precise movements otherwise. Yeah, you can kind of do a sine wave, but you know, it's a bit crap. And again, with shooting, like you can really just shoot in, you know, one of the four directions, so you can modify that a little bit by running in another direction at the same time. But by and large, you kind of need to line up with your enemies horizontally and vertically. So if you go to the first room here, here's some enemies. Now, as you can see, what I'm doing here is I'm essentially kind of alternating and being in between being next to them and being like above or below them. So I can shoot them and their shots don't hit me. So I've got a kind of cross-shaped attack and movement pattern. Next room, more monsters. And yeah, like what really matters with Binding of Isaac, like in order to like be, you know, competent at the game, sort of learning the movement and attack patterns of all these enemies. Because you don't have that many hit points. Like it's not insta death, but you've got like essentially at the start you've got 6 hit points. so you need to be a bit careful about that. I don't want to stand on that weird flashing thing because that's like acid. Just have one fly to finish off. There we go. Another mysterious pill to swallow. Should probably do something awful, but let's try it anyway. Oh wow, okay, that was just a large amount of pee. Okay, so yeah, each level you get like 1 or 2 new special abilities, and like a lot about in the game, it's really about getting these special abilities and kind of learning how to play with combinations of them, because some of them frankly are a bit awful. There's a whole bunch of ones which kind of change the way you shoot. You like shoot diagonally, or you like charge up a shot, or you just shoot big shots or something. And like most of those are kind of harder to use because like the way you're shooting right now, with kind of a fairly high fire rate, allows you to kind of walk your shots onto the enemy. You don't really have to think about where your shots are going because you're firing a constant stream. But if you only fire like a big shot every few seconds, then that doesn't work, and that actually makes the game a lot harder, even if the shot will do a lot more damage. Yeah, so here's another type of attacker, which again has this kind of cross shape. Ooh, no, actually they can shoot diagonally. I was just wrong about that. Yeah, and they move by basically teleporting, which makes them very annoying to fight against. Whereas there's flies, they basically barely move at all. I'm doing really badly. Turns out that talking and trying to play this simultaneously don't work so well. Oh well. No, I'm still alive, just about. So yeah, what I mean by positional here again. So okay, so I meant what I mean by all this positional stuff. I did this blog post which I linked at the start of the stream, which you should read, just basically about how a lot of the games which I enjoyed to play, well, that did something, are kind of really like all the dungeon crawlers which I enjoy playing are very much about like your relative position to the target. Like if you play something like Diablo, your position relative to the target only matters in the sense of range. Like, is it a melee attack, is it short range, is it long range, right? But here it really matters, like, are you above, are you below, are you diagonal or whatever? And fighting kind of becomes about recognizing enemy movement patterns and having the correct movement pattern of your own to fight against the enemies. Like these guys, these guys get like they basically don't move, and then suddenly like they put on this turn of speed with a little bit of a kind of warning signal. So that's kind of, you end up doing a similar thing. You basically shoot them until they move, and then you spend a little bit of time evading until they stop moving, at which point you start shooting them again. And like, so like this is different from like next time, just in comparison, I will play Darkest Dungeon. And like the point with Darkest Dungeon is, like the point with Binding of Isaac is that if you were to do perfect play, you could play the entire thing basically without taking damage. Like just, move perfectly and don't be there when you're, liable to take damage, and then ta-da, you don't take damage. Hoplite, which is in the third game which I mentioned in this list, is the same. You can, I think, theoretically play through Hoplite without taking a single point of damage. I haven't managed to do that. With Darkest Dungeon, on the other hand, like the way it works is that you like you don't really move around as much. You just have kind of a linear set of units, and you kind of do attacks. And then the attacks, like, there's no, it's turn-based. There's no like avoiding or evading. Like, I mean, there's an evade chance, right? But that's just a die roll. So in any kind of serious fight, unless you get randomly absurdly lucky, you're gonna take damage. And really good play isn't about like obviously it's about minimizing damage, but you're not going to be able to like play taking no damage at all. You're not going to be able to avoid this. It's really about using the really complex interlocking abilities and buffs and so on to win. Like, oh, I should like stun this guy, and now I should like heal this guy and buff this and so on. And it's way more complicated than this here, but basically it's all just like, you know, Binding of Isaac can be sort of boiled down to shoot the enemy, don't get hit. If you do those two things, then you kind of win. Whereas with Darkest Dungeon, it's like, you know, this whole football manager thing about managing your guys and so on. And both of them are fun games. But the thing is, Darkest Dungeon has much harder to get into, really. I mean, I to be honest, had to like look up some guides for basic gameplay in order to be not awful at it. Whereas with something like Isaac, I mean, it's a hard game, but you can just sort of, you know, get better at it. You just play it and you kind of pick up the muscle memory and you pick up the tricks of how to move and so on. And like all the threats, like basically the kind of threats you have are pretty obvious. Like, oh, there's a thing moving towards me, I would like to not hit that thing. Whereas in Darkest Dungeon, it sometimes feels like, you know, you have to kind of sit there and do a whole bunch of calculations to figure out what you should actually be doing. Here it's like, well, stop, you just, you know, don't get hit. And what's interesting about this in terms of game development is that it means games which are very positional, so where you can just sort of see where's the bad stuff, like where are the enemies, so I can shoot them and like not be hit, or they kind of have simple timing based things or just stuff like that, or oh yes, for this attack and you need to be like above the enemy or two to the left or something. That sort of stuff that hooks really well into like our kind of existing ability to kind of visually perceive stuff. Like we can play games like that. I mean, I said, you know, okay, I'm not doing so well here because I'm slightly distracted, but I'm still only slightly distracted. I'm managing to play this game because like kind of the bit of my brain that's doing all the fighting is semi-independent of the bit of the brain that's doing all the talking. I don't really have to think, you know, here. I don't really have to like engage, like, what's it, there's like system 1 and system 2, right? I don't really have to engage whichever system it was on Tuesday. That does like the kind of rational heavy lifting and the calculation and so on, whereas with Darkest Dungeon, that's totally what you're doing. So it's a different game experience, and this game experience is more easy to kind of make viscerally fun and easier for people to just sort of understand, and so that makes it a pretty good contender for like an indie game where you perhaps, you know, don't have like, you have to convince people quickly that it's fun. You don't have a vast amount of resources to use on like tutorials and really complex GUI stuff and so on. And as you can see, like if you've played my game, I totally didn't take this advice myself because my game is like complicated. There's a whole bunch of GUI stuff and everything. But yeah, if you're making an indie game of some sort, if you want something that kind of is accessible, that people can get into, but is still deep, I mean, this is a hard game and it's quite complex. The great thing about the sort of play where it matters, like, am I above or to left or to the right? Am I 1 or 2 tiles away? And so on. That can be very effective at having a game that sort of is made of simple components, but has a high kind of factor of recombination. That just happens because 2D space is complicated, right? And so instead of having to enumerate all the different scenarios of sort of, well, okay, if I'm in this environment and my sword has +3 against werewolves and I'm fighting against werewolves or something, it's just like, this weapon shoots upwards, so I need to be below the target. It's a lot easier to, you know, just do and to remember. And a lot easier to combine. You don't have to explicitly then like code the interaction of that with like a way of moving that lets you like teleport sideways or something. You can just sort of learn how these two things synergize. And I'm probably gonna die in a very short time now because I'm like down on half a heart. So yeah. So that was fairly fast. I think I was speaking a bit fast as well because, oh god, panic. But But yeah, that's kind of my manifesto for why I think there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with what I've called positional gameplay. You might call it whatever. So it's fairly simple kind of gameplay elements that produce good gameplay because like your relative position in like space and time matters, and that produces interesting recombinations. Like here, like this guy's actually a great example because now his attack pattern is diagonal. So my strategy for dealing with this guy is quite different. Most of the time, you know, you have to like always make sure to not be on the same axis as your enemies. And here actually that's exactly where you want to be. Yeah, that was useful. And so that makes for different tactics. And that was, you know, that's really a very straightforward difference. Oh, the angles at which the shots come out are different. You don't have to like explain that. You don't have a tooltip on this guy saying like, oh, by the way, he shoots diagonally. Then I died. You can just sort of see he shoots diagonally, and you can just sort of learn how to deal with that. So yeah, that's why I think this is, and obviously like Binding of Isaac, you know, is a game that does this. Crypt of the Necrodancer, which I don't know, I want to stream this, but the problem is like, I mean, it's a music-based game, so I really don't know if I can listen to the music and talk at the same time without going mad. Yeah, and also Hoplite, which is very positional. All do these sorts of things. But I think there's still a lot of mileage in this sort of concept. There's a lot of mileage in having games where it's really about kind of going, ooh, now if I move to the left and then up, then I'm in this position to then like attack like that, and that will do like this. It's almost like a little bit like I mean, obviously there's a twitch kind of element to it, a kind of high speed element to it. There's also just a really nice visual puzzle aspect of it, you know, a kind of a, where do I have to move in this configuration to have the kind of optimal outcome, which is quite pleasing to a certain part of your brain, I think. Yeah, so actually, I mean, I don't think I've streamed all that long yet. I am willing to stream longer. So I just realized we can totally play Necrodancer because there's one character which you can play which is isn't on a timer. So there with that character you just it's just like you move and then the enemy moves. It's like a more classic kind of dungeon crawl, and that's exactly what we want, because then I can just talk about like this positioning stuff at my own speed and make moves when I want to make moves, without, instead of like trying to play the game and simultaneously talk rapidly about everything that's happening. So Crypt of the Necrodancer is a rhythm roguelike. I am pretty much in awe of them in terms of both like the excellent trailers, which I skipped over because of time, whatever, and the really nice game design, and the fact that like they're great with words. I mean, Crypt of the Necrodancer just kind of sticks in your head, and rhythm roguelike sounds preposterous, but it's sort of catchy. It works really well. So how does this work? Well, it's basically, in a sense, it's your standard roguelike. You're in a tile-based environment. There's walls, there's enemies. You need to stab all the enemies. Well, you don't actually. You need to get onto like the next level, on and on until you get to like the end, and then you win, right? So I'm going to go into the character selection screen. I think it's the monk which I want. No, maybe the bard. Yes. Okay. So yeah, this guy, like the way it's meant to work is that there's music playing, and you have to move on the beat. If you don't move on the beat, like you have a kind of a damage multiplier, and that stacks up as you hurt enemies while staying on the beat. And if you lose the beat, then your damage multiplier goes back down. Damage multiplier, point multiplier, something like that. It can be both actually. So it kind of incentivizes you to move on the beat, and also all your opponents move essentially just after you on the offbeat, so to speak. And so moving on the beat, means moving at the highest speed again. Let's see. Okay, so apparently unlocking zones is per character, which I didn't realize. Okay, now we know. This is confusing. It's rearranged. Okay, whatever. Let's go into say zone 1 and actually, yeah, diamonds down here. Yes. Okay, none of this is very interesting. Let's just go in. Okay, so here we go. As you can see, we are here in the center. We can see some enemies and so on. And so I can just move with the arrow keys and whatever. Now, each of these enemies has a particular movement pattern. So the little hip wobbly skeletons here, they move every second beat. So I move, the skeleton raises its arms, and then I move again, and then the skeleton moves. So the point is, this makes it really obvious, like this means that I have to be in the right phase with the skeleton movements to not get hurt. Because now if I move forwards, skeleton raises its arms. Now I will do the wrong thing, I will move forwards again, and bang, it hits me, right? So if we go back again, so if I move forwards again, now I'd get hurt again. So instead I just like punch the wall, and then hit the skeleton, right? So that's like a really simple kind of one of the first kind of move patterns that the game teaches you, is how to move to kill skeletons without being hurt. Okay, here's a box. Excellent. Now, the way the damage pattern works of the dagger which we have at the moment is that it does damage in the direction of the tile which you want to move into. If there's an enemy there, it does damage. Now, this is a spear type, and it does damage, well, it can do damage immediately adjacent, but it can also do damage one block further away. Now, if you find some enemy to hit, there we go. So now I can hurt them like that. And that's super useful. It's a really useful weapons upgrade, because now I don't have to be so close to my enemies. So that makes a big difference. And so that's another thing where the game is very positional, because it's all about just, choosing a weapon with a particular attack pattern and then using that attack pattern optimally. Now I have the music playing in my head. Ah yeah, so here's another enemy. Here's the green dragon, and this guy, he just does a lot of damage, but he only moves every second turn. So given that I have a spear anyway, it's going to be pretty easy to kill this guy, he says hubristically. But if I only had a dagger, I would have to do a very careful pattern for a long time of hit, retreat, hit, retreat, hit, retreat. So go in here. Actually, let's take care of this stupid monkey thing first. Hit, retreat, hit, retreat, hit, retreat, hit. There we go. And of course, now this might seem like, oh, this is really easy, but remember, you're trying to do all of this on the beat, which is what makes it difficult. Let's just go to the shop. Okay, I guess I'll take these things, whatever. So I'll take the holster as well, just for demonstration purposes. So that lets you take, that lets you have two weapons in your inventory and switch between them. So yeah, again, I think this is something where there's a lot more stuff which you could do, like there's different attack patterns for weapons, like there's a broadsword as well, which kind of does a wide swing, so it hits the 3 tiles in front of you, which often means that you end up doing these maneuvers where you want to be kind of diagonal to your opponent and then kind of attack the space next to them to hurt them which doesn't quite work because some enemies can move diagonally. So and some of the spells here as well are positional. So like the fireball spell just shoots on a row, so it fires to the out to the left and to the right, so you need to be on the same row as your target. Bats, extremely annoying because they move randomly. See if there's anything. Ah, yeah, excellent. So here's a demonstration. Here's a broadsword. So now we have a different attack pattern. And like what this game does is like it has different attack patterns. There's also like a leapfrog shoes thing, which gives you a different move pattern. But I think this is something you could sort of build on. You could have quite a lot of different move patterns. You could have different attack patterns, maybe also other abilities or defenses or something. Like in Hoplite, the way it works is that, like, I mean, first off, it's a hex-based game, so it doesn't really translate. But like in Hoplite, the rule is if you start a tile, if you start your move on a tile next to an enemy and you end it on a tile next to that enemy, you kill the enemy. And so that's also very interesting in terms of positioning. Or if you have the spear, you can move directly towards it. It's basically exactly like the spear in this game. And here you can see we can move. Now we can do this wide sweep, so we can attack enemies diagonally, which, given that almost all enemies move. Okay, that's a boss basically, but he's about to fall into a hole. So no, apparently not. Thought he would fall into a hole. Okay, taunt him again and smack. So yeah. So I think you could do more things with movements, or you could like do positional blocking, for example, which would be very interesting. You know, it doesn't have to be a rhythm roguelike. If you removed the rhythm, here's a longsword. That's yet another pattern. So that attacks again at the distance of 2, but hits both tiles in front of you always. So this actually allows you to kill 2 enemies if you position yourself right. So yeah, I mean, if you remove the rhythm bit of it, then I made it entirely turn-based, I made it soft real-time or real-time or whatever, you could be a bit more complex in what you would do in terms of movement or attack or defense or something. And that would still be pretty simple in terms of implementation, but again will give you that kind of nice feeling of reading the room and kind of figuring out the correct sequence of steps to kind of dance in between your enemies. I think that's one of the things that's so great about these games. Again, you might not be getting the full impact here because I'm playing this kind of, you know, with this character who doesn't have the kind of normal move restrictions, which would give it a nice rhythm. But still, there's something really satisfying about like going into a room full of enemies and executing this clever, brutal dance through them, leaving them all destroyed and you without a scratch. That's like, in a sense, it's a kind of satisfaction you just can't get from a game like, say, Darkest Dungeon or Diablo or whatever, where you will inevitably take damage. It's not about not taking damage, it's about mitigating the amount of damage. And these sorts of games ultimately always come down kind of to a contest of, you know, damage per time. Can you do more damage per time, relatively speaking, than they can? Because you're healing yourself, because your attacks are better, because of some special abilities, whatever. But, you know, pretty much everything can be just boiled down to damage per time. And here, like, damage per time is not king. I would there are weapons like obsidian weapons and like silver weapons, I think, titanium weapons, which give you extra damage. But I would rather have a normal spear than a double damage titanium dagger, because the normal spear is so much more flexible. It's much more useful. And yeah, I mean, it's useful in a fairly straightforward way. It has more range, but like, even if it was more any weapon really, any weapon that's more interesting than a dagger, because like if it's not a dagger, then it has some interesting attack pattern that lets you do some interesting kind of moves. And the moment you've got that, you can pretty much play the entire game without getting hurt if you're careful. As long as you have a dagger, it's really difficult to not get hit, at least occasionally. I'm out of phase with the stupid gold thing. Right. Okay, so this is the boss battle. Which, to be honest, this particular boss battle is basically a quick time event, which means it's kind of trivial. Okay, not completely trivial, I'm failing, but it's not super hard if you have all the time in the world. So yeah, I hope I've sort of convinced you that in certain senses Binding of Isaac and Crypt of the Necrodancer share this very particular thing about this heavily positional stuff. I mean, compare it to like Diablo, compare it to like just like NetHack or something like that, or anything like that. Actually, I know what I'm going to play. I'll see if it works properly, or I'll try to play that in a moment. A third dungeon crawler game which isn't like that. Okay, whatever, exit game. So, third example is Dungeons of Dreadmore. I'll play this non-full screen because it always gets a little tetchy if it's full screen. Hopefully that will work. So Dungeons of Dreadmore is really, it's more like, well, it's a turn-based hack and slash RPG with graphics essentially, and it's quite fun. But yeah, now hopefully when it starts and everything, like I can show you that like its systems are way more complicated. You have so many more abilities and so much equipment. I mean, it has this huge flood of different weapon types and everything. Whereas like, which you have to sort through, which is actually the thing that's really boring about it. Like all the sorting through stuff. Whereas in Necrodancer you only have a few types of equipment, like there's like 20, 30 types of equipment in total. And you're gonna see like 6 of them, like ever or something, in one game playthrough, I mean. And in here there's like endless numbers and so many different abilities and whatever. Like, okay, and start a new game. Yeah. Okay, so like right at the start you need to choose 7 sets of skills to like even use. Like right from the get-go I'm just going to hit random. That gives me then a whole bunch of things, which will then give me a whole bunch of ability. Okay, the Dungeons of Dreadmore. Now, I have to say, apart from the whole having to spend so much time sorting your items aspect, I think this is actually a really fun game. So I don't want to dump on it massively because it's terrible or something. It's just I want to use it to illustrate a slightly different kind of gameplay. Unfortunately, it's cut off the bottom of the screen, which is not so helpful, but never mind. So now we've got all of these different things here in our inventory, like potions and stuff. And even right at the start, our character has more items and abilities that someone at the end of a run of Necrodancer would have. And there's of course items, and there's your character panel with the equipment and so on, and then the equipment has stats, and oh god, look at all the stats. And this is kind of over the top, and frankly, this was clearly intentional. They wanted to make a game really for people who love just all the stats and all the numbers. And the cool thing about this game is figuring out, okay, how do all these stats and numbers work? How do I make a build of equipment and skills and so on that's effective? So it's much more kind of cerebral in that sense. And it gets its depth from all of those different systems and figuring out how all of these systems work together. But each of the systems is relatively shallow. I mean, we're just talking, this does this amount of damage or whatever, or this is pretty much all of these are essentially one way or another of dealing or preventing damage. Okay, so here's an enemy. Again, it's turn-based, so we move one each. I smack him, he smacks me. So here's the difference now, right? There's no way I can play this game without getting occasionally smacked. I just have to sort of deal with this fact and occasionally eat some beef to regenerate my hit points, especially because the hit point meter's off the bottom of the screen. I can't see how healthy I am. Slightly awkward. And then almost immediately I get some kind of magic item and an egg which I can eat. I have some abilities as well. A stun ability, and I think that's just a direct damage ability or something. Okay, so yeah, positionality. Here's an enemy. It matters. Basically, the things that matter are, am I next to him? Because if I'm next to him, he can hit me. If I'm not next to him, he can't. That's actually about it. It doesn't really matter if I'm to the left or to the right or 1 or 2 or 3 units away or anything like that. So the positionality aspect in this game is much less, Am I here? Am I here? Am I here? Whatever, Can smack him, same from this side and this side, and he's being very nice and holding still. Okay, now he's working up. And that's fine, because the point is there's all of these other systems. I mean, if each of the weapons in this game had a different attack pattern, and all of that stuff, if you glue together Binding of Isaac, this, and Crypt of the Necrodancer, your brain would just explode with the complexity of it. But my point is that looking at this from a game development point of view, this took way more assets as well. This took way more assets, and it arguably took way more really boring testing, because you have all of these different items, and they all need pictures, right? They all need animations as well. At least some of them do, and so that's a lot more assets. It's a lot more money. It's a lot more time. You have lots of different weapons which have a different flavor, and they differ. But they don't differ nearly as meaningfully as the massive changes in between. If I had this sword, or if I had a warhammer instead, it would do something slightly different, and maybe the damage type would be different. And if I could remember what kind of enemies take what sort of damage, I might switch them out or something like that. Honestly, one issue with this sort of game is a lot of the time I, for one, actually don't quite care about all of the systems enough to really go into details. can you really be bothered to switch from like bladed weapons to blunt weapons for an extra 10% damage if you're gonna have to switch back like a moment later? You just, you know, continue hacking through whatever. It's not really critical. But with, you know, if the difference was in between hits the enemy in front of you or hits the enemy like 2 tiles in front of you, that matters, right? Ouch. So many items, so many different types of cheese and drink, and I mean, this is, you know, this is clearly a intentional thing with the game, as I said. Like, there's like 17 different types of alcoholic drink or something. And that's intentionally, there's intentionally this many. You know, there would have been no game mechanical difference if they just had like large drink and small drink or something. But it's, you know, it's sort of fun to do all of this. I should probably eat something. Apparently have minor blood debt, which is a thing, a bad thing, I think. There we go. Okay, and here's a big bad enemy. Let's hit him. I have no idea if I have any hit points left. Certainly adds a certain friction to the game. Okay. Do I have anything else to eat? There. Okay. Oh yeah, so here's a different weapon, right? Oh god, and here's the thing though, okay, this weapon is like, it does a different thing. It does like 1 point of crushing damage instead of 2, and it does no slashing damage, but it does, I guess, probably piercing damage instead. And it also decreases your accuracy and your dodge chance, which this doesn't do. So now the point is, like, what kind of build are you doing? You know, against what enemies are you fighting? Do you care about accuracy and dodge chance? You might not. So depending, that's a very useful thing to know. But you pretty much have to do a giant spreadsheet here to figure this stuff out. Yeah, it's a weird flail, so I could make. And yeah, this game is also heavily about like complicated crafting recipes, which is why there's so much stuff. So yeah, am I saying like this is a worse game? No, what I'm saying is this is a game that probably took a lot more of certain types of effort to make than something like Necrodancer. I mean, I'm sure Necrodancer took a long time to refine the concept and get it balanced and feeling really good. But this probably took a vast amount of time just for all of the all of the assets, all of the stuff, all of the systems, making sure the systems are working together correctly. Figuring out how to communicate all this information to the player without the player's head exploding. Yeah, so okay, I've leveled up. I think I have just received a tweet on the topic of my thing rather than a message, but maybe you can read it. Okay, Jacob Proc says, funny you mentioned that Dreadmore is all about numbers, given that Deus originally set out to make a game without numbers. I really have to say, yeah, that if that was your intent, I think you heavily failed. I mean, there's so many numbers here, like, and they really like the matter, right? I spend so much time comparing numbers because, like, I don't know if one weapon with a funny name is better than another weapon with a funny name. You have to round the numbers, right? Numbers, right? And actually, okay, okay, let's just dwell on this for a moment. The number one thing which drives me completely and utterly up the wall about this game is there's all of these icons There's so many icons, there's like 40 of them. There is no... Like if I go into the character sheet, like the problem is that like the most of the places you find these icons are already in tooltips, but because you can't have a tooltip on a tooltip, you don't know what they mean. You're just like, okay, this does to something, and then you like, if you want to find out what something actually does, then you actually have to hit C and then use your eyeballs in this. Oh god, how big is it? 6 times 4. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty huge. A 24 item grid. There's some more, 25, 26 at least. The resistances as well. So, oh god, so many. Like with the resistances, you literally can't know what they are unless you equip it and then look at what it says here and then unequip it again. And like, I'm sorry, but like I cannot really remember the difference in between critical chance and counter chance, right? They're both some thing with a sword on it. I'm sure if I played this game obsessively, I probably could, but I don't, right? And so does this mean I'm less fond of the game than I could be? Does it mean I played less? Does it mean I recommend it less? Yeah, probably. Does it make it the worst game? Yes, essentially, because in like Necrodancer, it's just like, you know, what areas does the weapon hit? And like, okay, how much damage does it do? But that's just like a 1, 2, 3 value. In Binding of Isaac, well, okay, I mean, there's a lot of obtuse abilities, but by and large, like, you shoot some kind of glob, and the more weirdly colorful it is, it does something. And like, you can just see how the shot moves and then deal with how it moves, you know. And here you have to do all of these numbers if you want to play well. I mean, obviously I could just like equip stuff because it looks cool, but then I wouldn't do very well. So yeah, it's both that this was probably a harder game to make in those aspects, and it's also a worse game in the sense that there's a whole bunch of explaining and careful UI design that's kind of lacking for me, which I would have kind of needed to really enjoy playing the game and really understand the game. Because just like you know, I play this for like a few hours, and then I have a giant pile of equipment. It's just huge, right? And I guess I could sell it, but frankly it doesn't sell for that much. And then I just have to kind of try and figure out how it all synergizes with all of my stuff. And I mean, that sounds fun, but it's not fun because there's so many abilities and they all roughly do the same thing, right? I mean, maybe there is, but there's no real difference between crushing damage and stabbing damage and piercing damage, except for like different weapons do them, and different abilities give bonuses, and different enemies probably have weaknesses to them. So if they have, I have no way of finding out. But like, you know, you could just endlessly repeat this. You could have squirrel damage and rutabaga damage and gently caressing damage and purple damage, and it's just a flavor. Like it doesn't like, you know, like fire damage doesn't even set the enemy on fire reliably, I don't think. Whereas like, you know, the damage types that matter in Necrodancer are: where does it hit? Does it knock back the enemy? Does it move you when you hit? Some weapons, like if you attack, you also move simultaneously as you're attacking. Others, you stay still, and that completely changes again how you have to move around. So there's far fewer pieces of information about the weapon, really. There's far less complexity there, but the complexity that there is in terms of stuff which A, really matters, makes a big difference, and B, is sort of immediately grokkable without actually having to look at any number higher than 3. That's basically it. I think that's the core difference. Again, to repeat, In a game like this, like Dungeons of Dreadmore or Diablo or also Darkest Dungeon or something, equipment and skills and stuff like that has a whole bunch of different mechanics, but the mechanics are often kind of similar and don't really interlock in super interesting ways. Say, Darkest Dungeon, for example, has Blight and Bleed, and yes, they do slightly different things, but they're actually both a damage over time mechanic. The only difference is some enemies are more resistant against Blight and some enemies are more resistant against Bleed, and some attacks do Blight and some do Bleed. You could just instantly add a third one and call it like Feeling Sad, and then you'd have some Feeling Sad type damage. Whereas with Necrodancer, it's like, well, yeah, any difference is going to be a meaningful difference, and you can just easily define a weapon, which is all there really is there, a weapon in terms of where it hits, how much it hits by, and if you move along with it, and if it pushes enemies back. I think that's literally it. And you could add extra mechanics to that. You know, it would be fun. There could be a stun type weapon, for example. That could be interesting. You could have a weapon which moves you back by one when you attack with it, or anything like that. You can think of more things, but again, like imagine the weapon that like every time you used it, it moved you back by one. That then changes in a 2D environment. That really changes your calculus. That really changes your movement pattern in an obvious way. So yeah, that's positional gameplay for you. I think it's a pretty awesome tool. I don't think it needs to be slathered over absolute everything. I'm not declaring like holy war on this kind of game, which is also fun. But I think if you are a developer who wants to make a dungeon crawl type game, think about interesting ways you could do this sort of positional thing with equipments or skills or whatever that have these very definite differences in terms of, like, all the things which I just mentioned are about positioning, right? Knockback, you moving along as well. Stun would be again about positioning in a sense because it freezes your target. And you can get a lot of mileage out of positioning for relatively little complexity in your game. So yeah, I think that's everything I have to say on the topic for today. And yeah, I will be back day after tomorrow, Thursday, with some airships development. Probably will be continuing on my little spiders, and soon hopefully I will also be able to announce the results of my search for an artist for Airships Conquer the Skies, which should be fun. For now, thank you for watching/listening. Do subscribe to the channel. I will continue talking and ranting about games and stuff and having ideas and stuff. So if you like this, subscribe and keep watching. And if you have any feedback, any kind of hate mail or whatever, hit me up in the chat. I'll be in the chat for a little while longer, or send me an email or whatever. Okay, that is it for now. Goodbye.